behalf of CARP Windsor-Essex chapter, our executive board, and our more than 2,200 members, and the members of this committee, I would like to thank you for joining with us this evening. My name is Dean LaBute, and I'm the chair of our Long-Term Care Transformation Committee. So we have a series of questions that have been prepared for you and shared with you in advance. And we will call upon Gay to ask you those questions. Gay, would you be so kind?
I am. Krysta, will you let me know if you're not hearing me or if there's any problems?
I sure will.
All right. So I'll ask the first question. What is your party's plan to provide a seamless system of home care, long-term care, and palliative care for our increasing elderly population in Windsor and Essex County?
Okay, so I'm going to jump to improving home care first, because I think it's very important because we know it's been lacking. I'm going to get the technical points right away. So one of the things is increase funding to home care services by 20%. That's to help people safely stay in their homes for longer. Create a standard basket of home care services that providers must make consistently available across the province, so that you don't have, in Windsor, you can get, this service and that service, but you can't get the third service. Or in another city, maybe you can get, nursing care once a week, but you can only get a piece. We want to standardize it across the province. This, I think, is important. Shift entirely to nonprofit home care providers within the public system. We saw that the worst outcomes for example, long-term care were in the privately owned for-profit care centers. The public centers actually fared a little bit better. And I think it's because it wasn't focused on profit, right? They weren't worried about spending based on the fact that they weren't going to make a profit. And when you say you can't afford to take care of these people properly during a pandemic and then pay dividends to your shareholders, that shows something is terribly wrong with the system. So we want to go towards the nonprofit. Provide a single access point within the family health teams to ensure that the care is consistent with patient needs, because right now it's very confusing who you have to talk to for what. The different branches aren't talking to each other. Sometimes you've got overlapping care or you don't get any care. And that's something that definitely needs to be taken care of. If we had a single point of contact, it would be much easier for everybody involved. Mandate that personal support workers are paid a minimum of $25 an hour and also paid for their travel time between visits. And the reason for that is, again, most of the PSWs that were provided by for-profit companies were paying their people minimum wage and unfortunately not offering them full-time employment with benefits. So a lot of them couldn't actually afford to continue working during the pandemic. Rising gas prices, they can't afford to pay for the gas to travel between appointments. That definitely is a problem. Increase high quality home care options for those experiencing frailty, dementia, and disability. We're finding that the supports for people who maybe their health is okay, but maybe they can't move around very well, or maybe they have dementia or Alzheimer's, or they have other disabilities. This is where we're falling off. This is where we're falling down, because family members can't take 100% of that responsibility. We've got an aging workforce. We know that we've got more and more people over the age of 65. And for example, I'm going to throw in a personal example here. I have two parents that both have health issues. My father is diabetic. He's on dialysis. He's got a few other issues. My mother is on a feeding tube. Sometimes she's mobile on her own and sometimes she's not. And even before the pandemic, it was very difficult to make sure that they were getting the care that they needed every day. Even though we have four children living in Windsor, it was still difficult to make sure that all of their needs were met, and it wasn't a money issue. So I think to myself, how horrible is it for the people who maybe don't have 4 kids living in Windsor, or don't have grandchildren who can come and help them? Or what if you can't afford to pay for some of the services on top of what other people would be able to get? I know myself, and I'm a proponent, Green Party aside, that these things have to change, and they have to change quickly. And it's not a matter of not knowing how to change it. We know how to change it. We just need to make the commitment to do it. Collect meaningful, this is an interesting one, collect meaningful quality indicators to hold healthcare organizations accountable and to provide quality improvements. So right now, some of the private for-profit, we're going to call them nursing providers. It could be PSWs, it could be nurses, it could be, there are various things that they send. They bid on these contracts, but nobody checks to make sure that they have the capacity to handle them. Nobody makes sure that when they say, yeah, we can do, you know, a nursing visit twice, or we can have somebody come to put this person in and out of bed twice a day. We can have a nurse come in once a day. We can have a dietitian come in once a week. Nobody ever checks to see that's done. That contract is paid on that weekly basis, whether they fulfill that or not. And on the other end of it, they're obviously not paying somebody, because if nobody came to your home, they're not paying anybody to go there. But there's nobody checking to make sure that what they're saying they're providing or promising that they're providing is actually the service that's being provided. And you have the people at home who have nobody to tell. So when my father was calling me at midnight saying that nobody had been there to change my mother and to help her get into bed, I wish he would have called me sooner than midnight, but there were times when the person arrived at 1 o'clock in the morning, because that was the earliest time that she could get there. So you never really know what's going to happen. And because there's no checks and balances, nobody's keeping an eye on this. Money's going to hand it over. Services aren't happening. They're not hiring people, so they're not paying people. And it just really has to change. Pilot a support program as part of a basic income phase-in for those doing unpaid caregiving in families and communities. So part of the issue that we had in my personal case with my parents is all 4 of us work full-time. We all have children. Through the pandemic, there were periods where we had to be isolated for one reason or another because of COVID exposures. So we had that issue. And it would have been nice to be able to take care of my parents full-time and to be able to help them. But unfortunately, I would never be able to afford to do that. I can't afford to not work to be able to take care of my parents. And I know a lot of other caregivers are in the same boat. They've had to give up their jobs in order to be able to stay home to take care of a family member, a spouse, a parent, even a child. And it really puts you at a disadvantage because you don't have that income, you don't have that break, there's no respite. The physical demands of the tasks are, you know, astronomical, and you're not getting a break. We believe that if you are home because you are a caregiver, or if you are a permanent caregiver to somebody in your family, you deserve compensation for that. And we need to equal the playing field. No more unpaid caregivers. We need to institute at least a basic income for that.
Okay, Krysta, I think maybe, I know our first question was very comprehensive, and you've covered a lot of things in your response, and perhaps you've even answered most of our subsequent questions. So I will move on to the next question and just say that if you have anything additional, you know, to give us regarding that question, you know, we'd appreciate it. But you've really given us a lot of information right at the start, and we're thankful for that. Okay. So if you don't mind, I'll move on to question 2.
Okay, yes.
Okay. What specifically will you or your party do to help more seniors stay in their homes?
Okay, so we've already talked about the caregiving, but there are other obstacles to home care, things like being able to afford to retrofit your home to put in bars or ramps or as other assistive devices. So definitely that is something. One of them is to make it easier for seniors to live together. So that means streamlining and simplifying the approvals process for co-housing and for co-living developments or arrangements. So right now, for people who are collecting any type of assistance, if they decide to move in with somebody, they actually lose part of that income, and that's not helpful. Increase support for community centers and neighborhood coalitions, because that will encourage community connections, and it reduces isolation, which is good. And create incentives for retrofitting homes to make them safer and easier to age in place. So I don't have numbers for the retrofitting, but that's all something that usually it depends on the things that need to be done. We're also talking about for accessibility. There is an accessibility plan, and all new buildings and all new homes are supposed to be following a new accessibility code, so that when you build a new home, it should already be optimized for things like wider doorways for wheelchairs, the turning points in bathrooms and things like that. And obviously that isn't happening. When we are building new public housing, that should be a priority, because we need more accessible units. And whether that be for seniors or whether that be for somebody else with disabilities, we need more accessible units. So we should be building them all to be accessible. That increases the areas where people can live. I think those are the two major points for staying in your own home. Be able to retrofit what you need and just make more houses with the accessibility in place.
Okay, thank you. So on to question 3. What is your vision for long-term care? Specifically, we would like you to comment on how your plan will provide a quality and stimulating environment that is based on the individual needs of seniors.
Okay, so we believe as a party in something called a caring society, obviously, which is healthcare and all of that sort of thing. But the other part of it is connected communities. And part of a connected community means that you should be able to access services and things that you need within about 15 minutes of your own front door. So for seniors, we often hear that they don't have activities that are near them that they can get to. Maybe they can no longer drive. Maybe they can't drive at night. Maybe the community center that they used to go to for senior programs and active living programs have closed. We want to put all of that back. We're talking about put the services back in the community where they belong. Stop building things out in the middle of nowhere, thinking everybody's going to get into a car and drive there. If there was a community center that you could get to, even as a senior, to be able to walk on a pathway that's accessible and not too far, that has the appropriate spacing for the things that you need and offers programs that you need and that you want. We're talking about increasing funding for things like community centers, not just for children, but also for adults. We're talking about more green spaces and enhancing our green spaces to have not just playgrounds for children, but actually equipment for the older generations, for those of us who want to exercise, but maybe don't want to do sit-ups, things like that. So the whole idea of a connected community it also includes transportation. So our public transportation in Windsor is abysmal. If you can get on a bus, it's not always accessible. Most of them now raise and lower, but we don't have many drivers that are willing to do that for some reason. But if you had a bus that was inexpensive, easy to get to, meaning you have a bus stop very close to your front door, that was clean and it was convenient and can bring you where you need to go, I think more people would take it. I think more seniors would get out and do things and go to parks and all of that, because they would actually be able to get there whether they have a car or not.
Krysta, when we're specifically talking about long-term care homes, do you have a vision for these homes being different from what they are now?
I would say yes, because I think especially when you go into the private system, when they do a long-term care home, I've seen some that look very nice. I mean, they look very nice. And you walk in there and you see these, very nicely decorated areas, and that's awesome. But it's really more almost like a warehouse for people. If you don't have the staff, if you don't have the facilities. If you don't have somebody doing a recreation program, and I'm not talking about just bingo, bingo's great, but let's find something else. Let's do painting, let's do crafts, let's do pottery, let's do poetry reading. Let's bring in people from the community to interact with the people that live there. We have a long-term, well, it's not quite long-term care, not far from where I live. And the children's groups like Brownies and Girl Guides and the schools used to go in there. This was before the pandemic, obviously, but even before the pandemic came, they weren't letting those groups go in there anymore because they were citing liability. We can't have kids come in because, you know, the seniors, what if something happens to somebody? What if somebody gets hurt? What if one of the seniors, you know, doesn't like the kids coming? And I thought that was a disservice because I remember bringing the Brownies there. And I don't remember seeing a single person who wasn't beaming from ear to ear. The kids, the adults that were there, I just can't even fathom that for liability reasons, we can't bring Brownies in. We can't bring in a school choir. We can't bring in an Irish dancing group. You know, to me, that doesn't make sense. Windsor has a lot to offer in the arts and culture community. And I think we need to start connecting that to the people who need to see it. Maybe more outings. I think that's another thing too. Not just to the grocery store, not just to the mall. We need more outings. We have a beautiful art park with a cart that even brings you along. I mean, could you imagine? That would be awesome to bring a whole group out there. But you need the staff to do it. It's true. You need people to be able to do it. And I think that if we focus on, we need to hire more staff, we need to hire more of the nurses and things that people need in the PSWs, but then we also need to focus on the other staff that make it nice to live there.
Okay, with that last point that you made, let's do question 4, which is, what is your party's plan to attract and retain healthcare workers in home care and in long-term care? And what staffing client ratio does your plan include?
Okay, so I want to touch on the ratio. Okay, this is the one. There's so many numbers that I look at all day long. I want to make sure I have the percentages right. So for the numbers, legislate staffing in long-term care facilities to include a minimum of 1 nurse practitioner for every 120 residents, and a staff composition that includes 20% registered nurses, 25% registered practical nurses, and 55% personal support workers. Mandate a minimum of 4 hours of nursing and personal care per resident per day, including a minimum of 48 minutes of care provided by a registered nurse and 60 minutes provided by a registered practical nurse. Increase long-term care resident access to allied health professionals such as dietitians, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, social workers to a minimum of 1 hour per day. I think right now we are lucky if somebody is getting 1 hour a week or even 1 hour a month. And that's just absolutely crazy. Mandate continued professional development for staff on geriatric care, practices for caring for residents with dementia, and palliative and end-of-life care. I don't think we have enough people who specialize in that, and that's definitely, that's not a good thing. Fast track updating staffing plans and ensure consistency of care by requiring full-time personal support workers and nursing positions. So part of the reason why we have the staffing issues that we have, partly through the pandemic and partly before that, is it's not that we don't necessarily have the staff, we don't have the full-time staff. So it's, if you are working 60 hours a week, but you're not a full-time employee, it means that you never really know when you're working. You're waking up every morning not knowing if you're going into work or not. During the pandemic, they had to limit. So for example, I know people who work as nurses in PSWs that had to work at 2 different facilities because they weren't guaranteed full-time hours on either one of them. So they had to split their time. Well, during the pandemic, they weren't allowed to do that. You had to stay at one site. But if that one site isn't giving you enough shifts to actually to live on, or you couldn't plan your week, how do you plan childcare if you never know if you're going to work? If they're going to call you at 6 a.m. and tell you to come in, there will always be casual and on-call people for emergencies, but that's not what I'm talking about. A large portion of the staff are these part-time people who don't have stable employment. Then you have the problem where the pay. So some, for example, PSWs, so the ones that work on here in Huron Lodge, they are part of the city, they are unionized. They get up to $31 an hour. But if you look at the PSWs that are working for the for-profit companies and nursing homes, they're often making minimum wage. So it's hard to justify the mileage and the wear and tear on your body and all of the other things when you're not being treated as a valuable employee and you're making a very low wage. And when there was an incentive of an additional, I believe it was $3 an hour through COVID, that was never passed on to the actual employees. In fact, the for-profit owners kept that and called it profit.
Okay, the last question, and we are getting short on time, so so as an electorate, how do we know you will put your plan into practice? And the next part is, what are your specific timelines and benchmarks for the implementation of the changes you are promising for home care and long-term care?
Okay.
So how do we trust you? And do you have some timelines?
Timelines. Okay. So when the Green, and obviously it's always taking somebody at their word, right? When the Green Party says something, it's usually fact-based and evidence-based. So it's not a generalization. We will end hallway medicine, but then we never say how we're going to end hallway medicine. We go at it by a different way. We look at why is the problem happening, what's going on around it, and how can we make our changes? It's evidence-based. It's not just a guess. It's nothing like that. So one of the things is, for example, building 55,000 long-term care beds by 2033 and at least 96,000 by 2041 because of the growing demand. So this isn't even talking about the current demand. This is talking about the growing demand. We've got an aging population. We have a costed document, and I can send that to you, that actually shows not only the amounts, but when. We're not saying we're going to build these 30,000 today. We know that's not going to happen. We need to be able to get the money to do it, and we have to shift some things, some funding from here to there and that sort of thing. So in the document, not only does it tell you when and the projection of the numbers, it also tells you where we're getting that from. So where is that money coming from, and how it's going to be changed.
We would really appreciate your sharing that.
Okay. And I will, because I have found when I look at the other, and you know, who am I? But when I look at some of the other costed platforms, it does tell you, yeah, we're going to put, you know, 1.5 billion in this, but it doesn't tell you where we're going to put it. We say we're going to put it in nursing. We're going to put it in frontline healthcare. We're not just putting it in healthcare. We're putting it where it needs to go in healthcare. Because of the way the promises have been made in the past. So for example, they said that they were going to increase funding for, well, what did they increase the funding for? Because they didn't do any capital improvements. They outsourced all the maintenance. So that was kind of a loss. They didn't hire any more nurses, and they actually put a bill in place to keep them from collective bargaining and you know, raising their wages. Where did all of these increases go? The government's been pouring money into healthcare for years, but where is it going? We're always told there's no budget. There's no budget for safety gear. There's no budget for supplies. There's no budget for beds. There's no budget for this. Well, where is it all going? And how come we can't see? Why aren't they showing us?
Yeah. Okay, Krysta, I'm going to have to, I'm going to kind of have to end this now. And I am going to ask Dean, the chair of our committee, if he wants to come in and say a few words. Dean, I think we've only got about 4 minutes to 7:30.
Okay. Krysta, I have two supplementary questions. I'll ask you one. For the Green Party, if you form government, rescind Bill 218. Now, if you're not familiar with Bill 218, it was brought in at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when thousands upon thousands of seniors were dying in long-term care. Mm-hmm. And this bill was made into law, provided a protected shield around long-term care retirement home owners and investors. would a Green Party government immediately move to rescind Bill 218?
Definitely. Along with the shift to nonprofit and out of the private market, that is definitely one of the things. It doesn't make sense that we would give people open market on denying somebody water and letting them die in a pandemic, locking the front door and having all of the management leave. That doesn't make any sense to us, and that should never have been enacted in the first place. And I'm pretty sure that's one of the things that, if you look at Mike Schreiner, from the leader of the Green Party, from the last campaign to now, every extra gray hair he has is fighting things like this, because it's wrong,
Krysta,
no matter how you look at it.
Krysta, you've touched on already in your comments the essence of my second question. So I will call upon Henry to thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very
Krysta.
much.
Krysta, on behalf of Dean, Gay, Ann, Donna, and myself, I'll repeat Dean's thank you for coming this evening and for sharing with us your thoughts and your ideas on how to help us provide better home care and long-term care for our seniors in Windsor-Essex. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, Krysta.
Thank you for having
Bye,
me.
Krysta. Bye,
Bye,
thank
Krysta.
you.
Good evening.
Bye. Thank you. Hi, Lisa.
Whoa, that's really high.
There we are.
Or well, I am really short. I was going to say that's really high, or I'm really short, but it was a combo. I think we're good now, though.
Dean, Lisa is with us now.
I heard.
It was quite the
I didn't
entrance.
know we could have both on at the same time. That was intriguing.
We're okay.
Get more of you on. There you all
Hey,
are.
Lisa, good evening. My name is Dean LeBute. I'm the chair of this Long-Term Care Transformation Committee. And on behalf of CARP Windsor-Essex Chapter, our executive board, the members of this committee, and our more than 2,200 members of our chapter, we want to thank you for agreeing to join with us this evening and to review the questions we've already submitted to you for your review. I will now call upon Gay to present you with the 5 questions. Gay?
Hi, Lisa.
Hello, good evening. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be doing it. So we'll just get into the questions right away. The first one: what is your party's plan to provide a seamless system of home care, long-term care, and palliative care for our increasing elderly population in Windsor and Essex County?
So in October 2020, we had released our plan to fix long-term care and home care. And just to kind of summarize it quickly, we believe as New Democrats that long-term care and home care should be publicly funded, publicly delivered. We strongly believe that we need to get the profits out of long-term care and home care. We also strongly believe in having connected services. We know that many people that are in long-term care could stay in their homes if we had a stronger home care system. And that starts with not only taking the profit out of both of those things, but investing in the frontline workers to ensure that there are enough frontline workers to be able to provide that hands-on care. I've heard it time and time again, both from the workers and the people that access home care, that oftentimes the PSW that comes to support them is either late or doesn't come. And that is because there are not enough of the workers. And so they're filling in for other workers, or they're running from one end of town to the other. And so what we need to be doing is investing in the people that are actually providing the care, ensuring that there are enough of them, that they're paid well, that they're respected, that they have provincially or paid sick days, provincially mandated paid sick days, so that when they're feeling ill, they can stay home and not risk getting others sick. So that's just kind of like a brief overview of our commitments as far as long-term care and home care, but also more specifically to palliative care, because I have a bill that I had introduced, Dan's Law, which was really, it was inspired by a gentleman who was originally from Windsor, who when the GM plant closed, he moved out to Alberta and for work, and was diagnosed with cancer when the wildfires were going through. He lived in Fort McMurray, and he was airlifted into Edmonton, and his wife lived in a hotel at the time. And he was told that that his cancer was untreatable, and basically was told that, you know, he had an option of either they couldn't go home because their home was in Fort McMurray, but he was told that he could either go die in the hotel room with his wife, or to come back to Ontario to be with his two daughters, back to Windsor to be with his two daughters that were here. And at the time, he thought, you know, we have a universal healthcare system, so he would be able to come here and he would be able to get the care that he needed. He'd be able to get the hospital treatment he needed, or the home care that he needed, or to go into hospice if needed. And what they found out very quickly is that was not true. So I introduced a bill named after him, Dan's Law, which eliminates the 3-month OHIP wait time for people that have a serious or terminal illness, for them to be, if they're from within Canada, to be able to come back to Ontario, wherever that may be. This case, it was Windsor specifically, and have that 3-month OHIP wait time waived, so that they can get the home care that they need without having to pay for it out of pocket, to get the medication they need without having to pay out of pocket, to be able to, you know, go into hospice. And I have to give a lot of credit to the people at hospice here. They kind of snuck them through the back door, so to speak, so that the Ministry of Health wasn't really clear on where he was receiving his care. And they provided the end of life care that he needed, so that he could pass with dignity and surrounded by the people that love him. So palliative care is something that isn't talked about enough. And if you talk to any palliative care doctor, they'll tell you the same thing. And we need to be investing in the palliative care system, ensuring that people have access to hospice or home care when they need it. Nobody wants to face the end of life in a hospital bed.
That's true. Thank you, Lisa. Question number 2. What specifically will you or your party do to help seniors stay in their own homes?
So we believe in strengthening our home care system. So that means investing in frontline workers to be able to deliver that care. We also recognize the value, really they're undervalued, of what people often refer to as informal caregivers, which are often family caregivers. And so we're offering a credit to those family caregivers / informal caregivers for the work that they do to help supplement the home care system, and being able to offer individuals who want to stay in their home financial support, and able to retrofit in some ways their homes, whether that's grab bars or ramps or whatever that may be. You know, when we're talking about caregivers too, and I'll probably mention this in a couple of the questions, but I had also introduced a bill during the beginning of the pandemic called the More Than a Visitor Act, to talk about individuals who do end up having to go into a congregate care setting, for them to have legislated access to their family caregivers, because as we saw throughout the pandemic, they were the first ones that were locked out, was the family. So we recognize the value of caregivers and the role that they play, and so we want to be able to compensate them for some of the work that they do.
Okay, next question. What is your vision for long-term care? Specifically, we would like you to comment on how your plan will provide a quality and stimulating environment that is based on the individual needs of seniors. So we're looking at the long-term care homes specifically.
Yeah. So again, I'll say that one of the first things that needs to happen is that we need to shore up the staffing in long-term care. And again, that goes back to ensuring that those frontline workers are respected and paid appropriately, that they have their paid sick days. But we also believe that we know that some of these big facilities are necessary at times, but we really believe that we need to be moving more towards a community-based model. So I'll use as a comparison, when you look at group homes for individuals with developmental or intellectual disabilities, they have smaller homes built within our community. I was out canvassing and knocked on one of their doors the other night, actually, where they have fewer residents that live there. Smaller homes right in the community. They look like any other home within that neighborhood. And to ensure that they're culturally appropriate. So ensuring that the food that is being cooked and served is culturally appropriate for the people that live there, to ensure that there are staff there that speak the language of the people that live there, so that there's that clear communication, so that the residents within that community-based home are able to clearly communicate their needs. Because what we find now with these large institutions, basically is what they are, is their choice of menu and food is not always culturally appropriate. You know, I don't like everything, every type of food, and so it's important that I am able to, if I can choose what I want to eat or not want to eat, then we should expect the same for seniors within long-term care. And again, we need to ensure that we have more staff that can actually communicate with the residents in long-term care. But for us, it's really important to get the profit out of it, and ensure that people have those smaller homes to live in within their own neighborhoods, rather than these big institutions.
Mhm. Thank you. You've touched on this a little already, but the next question is, what is your party's plan to attract and retain healthcare workers in home care and long-term care? And what staffing client ratio does your plan include?
So again, it goes back to paying and respecting those frontline workers for the work that they do, ensuring that they have the paid sick days and the benefits to make the jobs more attractive, recognizing that it's not an easy job that they do. It can be very physically and emotionally demanding as well. And the people that they provide that care and support for become their families. You know, it's like it's their own parent or brother or sister. And so what we need to be doing is ensuring that that they are compensated fairly, and they have those paid sick days, and they have those benefits, to make it more affordable for people to go to school, to get trained to be a nurse or a PSW or other frontline workers. What we have right now with our post-secondary system is it often excludes a lot of people because they simply can't afford to go to school. And we need more flexible training, as far as recognizing that oftentimes these frontline workers are women. This is largely a women-led profession, the caring profession. And so to have affordable childcare and accessible childcare, it's not enough that it's affordable. We actually have to have the childcare spaces available, so that people that want to go back to work, especially women that want to go back to work or want to go to school to be trained, have that childcare support, and that they're able to afford to go back to school. So I think that's a really important piece when we're talking about attracting and retaining workers. And as far as ratio, we had many times, my colleague Franz Jelena and Teresa Armstrong as well have multiple times introduced the Time to Care Act, which would legislate a minimum of 4 hours of hands-on care for each resident, which would mean more staff is required to provide that care. And unfortunately, through the successive Liberal and Conservative governments, they never pushed that bill across the finish line. And you know, in comparison, the Conservatives are talking about an average of 4 hours of hands-on care, but that's an average. That is not a minimum per each resident. And it also it includes non-resident facing work. So oftentimes we're talking about kitchen staff or managers who aren't providing they're providing service, but they're not providing that hands-on care. So we need to ensure that there is legislation in place that makes it very clear that when we are talking about hours of hands-on care or ratio of care provider to resident, that it's very clear that is actually people who are providing care, whether that is feeding or bathing or helping to toilet or doing lifts. That's legislation lays out very clearly that you cannot include a manager who's in the office as part of that ratio.
Yes, excellent. Okay, number 5, as an electorate, how do we know you will put your plan into practice? And what are your specific timelines and benchmarks for the implementation of the changes you are promising for home care and long-term care?
So I think as far as fulfilling promises, you just have to look at the history of New Democrats, the work that we've done in the legislature, just in the last 8 years that I've been there, and even before that. As I said, that Time to Care Act bill has been tabled multiple times. It had been tabled multiple times before I was even elected in 2014. We have long talked about the need. One of my colleagues, Catherine Fife, has introduced multiple times through Liberal and Conservative governments the Till Death Do Us Part Act, which would ensure that couples, if they require long-term care, that they are placed in a home together as opposed to being separated and placed into other homes. So there, and again, my More Than a Visitor Act, the fact that we have been lobbying for many years against successive Liberal and Conservative governments to take the profit out of long-term care. I think if you look at the history of the New Democrats and how long we have been advocating for these changes, is quite indicative of the direction that we want to go. And to our commitment to making that happen. As far as specific timelines, that's a little tougher to nail down. So that's, it's work we would get to doing right away. So those bills that I talked about, I actually forgot, my colleague Laura May Lindo introduced a bill too about a seniors advocate, which again, the Conservatives did not support and get across the finish line and get legislated. But those are things that we could do immediately. As far as the getting the profit out of long-term care, that's a little longer that's going to take, because we're talking about facilities or companies, for-profit companies that have licenses already that have been given to them by other governments. So that's a matter of phasing those things out over time as those licenses come up, or someone applies for a new license, ensuring that those are not-for-profit spaces, as opposed to the for-profit model. So some of those things that we can do right away. And there's other things that will take time, but we will get to work on them right away, so that some of those things start to come into play and happen as quickly as we can possibly have them happen.
Okay, Lisa, we've addressed the questions that were supplied, but Dean, our chair, has a couple more questions if you would be willing to answer them.
Sure, I'll do my best.
Okay, Dean,
Absolutely.
do you want to?
I will. Thank you very much, Kay. Lisa, good evening once again. I've enjoyed your responses to our 5 questions. I have 2 supplementary questions, but I really don't have to give you much background on these 2 issues. What is Bill 218? And that is, as you know, commonly referred to as the Supporting Ontario Recovery and Municipal Elections Act. Would Ontario Liberal NDP government, if formed government, would you immediately move to rescind Bill 218?
Okay, so if I'm remembering correctly with Bill 218, that is the one, I believe, that puts an iron ring around the...
That is correct.
Yeah.
Around the owners and operators and retirement and long-term care homes and their investors.
Right. And that bill actually protects the government from any type of legal liability as well. And that is something that we against when the Conservatives tabled it. Unfortunately, with their majority government, they were able to put it through and get it passed into law very quickly. But that is something we are very, very strongly opposed to. We believe that when there is negligence, that the people responsible need to be held accountable. And that includes a government.
Yes, but would you rescind it? Would an NDP government in Ontario rescind Bill
Absolutely.
218?
Absolutely. We did not support that legislation. We do not support protecting the individuals who, again, are putting profit over the care of people. And we believe that they should be held accountable. So that is something that we absolutely would repeal.
Okay, that is very good to hear. The second question deals with presently in Ontario, as you know, we have over 700,000 Ontarians being recipients of home care. Conversely, we have approximately 70,000 Ontarians residing in long-term care. The way the money is budgeted, 87% of the money budgeted goes to long-term care and only 13% goes to home care. Would an NDP government immediately act to reverse this inequity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we know that there are many people in long-term care that could live at home, comfortably at home with the right supports, and that is home care. So absolutely, that is something that we have committed to is strengthening home care, taking what we have and building on that in order for more people to be able to stay home or age in place, as it's often phrased. And we know that, again, that's a good portion of the money, which is public dollars, that is going to long-term care, are going directly to for-profit companies and to the shareholders, rather than to actually providing that hands-on care to the residents. So we are absolutely committed to building a better home care system where people are able to stay at home.
Thank you very much for that. And how are we doing time-wise? Anne?
She's muted. I think we've got about 11 minutes to 8 o'clock, Dean.
All right, thank you for that.
Mhm.
Thanks,
Okay, Lisa, is there anything else you would like to share with us with respect to your positions affecting local issues pertaining to long-term care and seniors issues and persons with disabilities that you could share with us for the next few minutes?
Yeah, I think one of the other things that's really important is to talk about the affordability for people to be able to stay at home, and you know, bringing down the cost of hydro and everyday bills as we've seen them skyrocket, and having an option, which is something that we're committed to as well, an option of and it's in our platform around deferring taxes. So kind of like how you almost like a reverse mortgage, really, so that you can use the money that you have to go towards the things that you need in order to be able to stay at home, and that money then is repaid to government upon the sale of the home, rather than you know, people having to struggle to make ends meet in order to be able to stay home. Many people on fixed incomes, especially nowadays, are really, really struggling to stay afloat, to pay the hydro bill and the phone bill and put food on the table. And what we've seen is an alarming increase of seniors who are housed, but still going to shelters and food banks to get food because they simply can't afford to do both. And that should never be the case when the people that help build this province are having to rely on food banks because the cost of living has gotten so high. We have a really big problem. And I think that over the years, what we've seen are governments that haven't really addressed seniors' issues, and they haven't really focused on seniors' issues. And that's something that really needs to change. We all become seniors at some point. And so we need to make sure that we're making the investments. And Dean, you know, kind of tagging on to one of the comments you made before about the difference in the investments that go to home care as opposed to long-term care. Something that I always say to people, and my portfolio is individuals with developmental disabilities over the age of 18 and social assistance. And there's always the argument that we can't afford to do this. Governments will always argue we can't afford to do this when we're talking about raising the rates for recipients of the Ontario Disability Support Program, or for individuals with developmental disabilities over the age of 18, to invest in supportive housing for them. I always say, when you invest in people in the front end, the savings is far greater on the other end. And what I mean by that is, when we ensure that people have the home care that they need, when we ensure that we are investing in education and healthcare overall in our communities, fewer people are relying on the hospital for treatment. One of our things is a commitment to pharmacare and dental care. And I can tell you, as a dental assistant, I'm very excited about dental care, because we saw many seniors and many low-income people with disabilities, who could not afford to see a dentist. And what would happen is they go through the cycle of showing up in the emergency department at the hospital, only for a doctor to say, I can't provide care, I can't provide dental care. Here's the prescription you need, go and see your dentist. But then that person couldn't afford to fill the prescription, and they couldn't go to see the dentist in the first place. So they end up back in the emerge, because they know they can use their OHIP card. So we believe that you should be able to access, everyone from beginning of life to end of life should be able to access the medication that they need. They shouldn't have to make a decision between paying a bill and taking the medication. So when we invest in those people on the front end, the savings to our healthcare system, or for the younger ones, our education system, and in some cases our justice system, is many, many times greater than the initial investment that we put in. It's all about it.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much for that. As for the span of life you mentioned, reminds me of a phrase from West Side Story, from the womb to the tomb you're talking about.
That's right. We can't afford, and that's what I say to people, we can't afford to not invest in these public services.
Okay, Lisa, at this time, I'm going to call upon Henry to thank you on behalf of our committee. Henry?
Thank you, Dean. Lisa, another long day on the campaign trail for you. And on behalf of Dean, Anne, Gay, and Donna, I'd just like to thank you for meeting with us and sharing your ideas on how to protect seniors and all others in good health care all across Ontario. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was nice to finish off my day with you all. It's always good to see you.
Thank you, Lisa.
It's been a while. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Have a good night.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
As
Okay,
Lisa
it's still recording, Dean, but I mean, we'll have to ask Anthony to edit that. So if anybody has any
Yep,
comments.
that's not a problem.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. Last thoughts, my dear colleagues?
I thought both ladies were excellent, knowledgeable
Mhm.
and prepared.
Indeed. Henry, your thoughts?
I agree with Anne wholeheartedly.
Absolutely. I concur. Gay?
I concur as well, but I also could see the experience behind Lisa, in responding to the questions. She was pretty direct with her answers, and they were excellent answers as well. So
Donna?
Yeah, I agree with Gay that you could tell that she was very experienced in it. I was impressed with the first one. I really was.
Yeah, Krysta.
Yeah.
Now,
My question
people
is,
that's-
I'm just not sure where all
Please.
this money is going to come from.
Yeah,
If we
like
can't-
for the people that saw our guests today, like the earlier sessions and then this evening, since I'm listening, I thought with Frank and with Krysta this evening, I could hear them turning pages. So they were actually reading from script.
Prepared script. Yes, they were. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I wanted to say that I thought that Krysta is a working woman. And
Yes,
it was a, a full day for her. And then to come out in the evening, I thought she did quite well.
she did.
Even though she didn't have the experience, she certainly had the fortitude to meet and to share. And she knew her party's line. She was able, even though she was reading, she was able to share that with us. We did have examples where other people couldn't. They just didn't know the party line, which was very unfortunate.
It is.
I think though,
Well,
with
that's
Krysta, if
all
you-
part of life's experience.
right, I think she's experienced it firsthand, so she knows each step,
Yeah.
how it goes.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes,
We all agree.
Yeah,
So we shall reconvene on Friday morning, 10 a.m., actually 10 minutes to 10, for our last day of interviews.
Okay,
So everyone, thank you very much. Job well done as always.
sounds
So I'll say
good.
Thank
good
you.
evening to you.
Good
Yeah,
night.
Thank you.
everyone.
Night.
good night,
Night.
everyone.
Good evening.
Night.
Good
Bye-bye.
night, everyone. Bye-bye.